All right, President Donald Trump says the nuclear talks with Iran are going well, even as more discussions are being planned for later this week. Let's bring in Bill Nigut, former political reporter with the Atlanta Journal-Constitution and WABE Public Radio, trial attorney Kelly Hyman and Jason Lee of Bossip here with me now. Welcome to you all. So, Bill, let's start here with the talks, the nuclear talks. What is the definition of going well for this first meeting with Iran?
Well, that's a great question. I mean, the first thing we need to remember is that although Donald Trump seemed to suggest that this was going to be direct talks between Iran and the United States representatives, that's not what has been happening. The two sides have been talking separately to Oman representatives. They had a brief meeting together. And of course, Trump is going to pump this up, as he always does. But of course, we do have to remember, Victor, that we had an agreement with Iran,
the JCPOA,
formulated by President Obama in 2015, that Trump blew up when he got to the White House. So he's starting over again. Obama, at the time, said, we're comfortable, with an international agreement behind him, we're comfortable with Iran developing peaceful uses for nuclear, not nuclear weapons. Trump's now saying no nuclear at all. Iran's never going to go for that.
You know, the 2018 meeting between Trump and Kim Jong-un, there was the agreement signed, and they were supposed to be going toward this complete, verifiable, irreversible denuclearization. That clearly didn't happen. It paused the ballistic missile tests, and lots of flags, handshaking and all. How much should that inform what we're watching here, or what we should expect to come out of this at all?
Well, I think we should always remember with President Trump, look, it's a wonderful thing. We shouldn't dismiss the fact there are talks going on, but we always remember with Donald Trump, a lot of what is happening is performative, not substantive.
You know, I find it really interesting is who's representing the U.S. in his talks. For who you'd expect the Secretary of State to be there, but there's someone else, someone from Trump's inner circle representing the U.S. and negotiating, so to speak, for the U.S.
Yeah, exactly.
Steve Witkoff, who is not only handling, and we went through the list earlier, he's not only handling these talks, he's handling Israel v. Hamas, Ukraine v. Russia, the Saudi-Israeli normalization, the hostage negotiations to bring people back from around the world. And I wonder, you know, Pompeo would have been at this talk, would he not?
You would expect that.
Blinken, I mean, the previous administration wouldn't have probably gone into these, but you would have expected the Secretary of State. Let me ask you, Kelly, CNN's count now is that 525 student visas have been revoked. Many of them because of the involvement with pro-Palestinian protests. Mahmoud Khalil on Friday, an immigration judge determined that he is deportable. I want you to listen to the reaction from one of his attorneys who was on with me on First of All yesterday. We have that?
Really a shameful, disgraceful process. The whole thing felt like a show trial. The judge had her mind made up from the beginning, was extraordinarily hostile, didn't care about the Constitution, didn't care at all about legal process, didn't care at all about the validity or the quantity of evidence.
And the Secretary of State's memo says that it was because of his views and associations. You surprised by that finding by the court?
I'm not surprised. Basically, it's an issue of whether there is a national security threat or there's a national security concern, or if, in fact, when someone is here, that they do something because they have the visa and they are basically not here as a U.S. citizen because they have the visa as well. But they can appeal it as well, and I think that's really important to remember, that they have this opportunity to appeal it in the courts. And ultimately, this is definitely something that can go to the Supreme Court, because another issue or concern is First Amendment right, free speech, right? Citizens and non-citizens have a First Amendment right to free speech, but balancing that with national security and how that plays out with immigration will be key when the Supreme Court hears these type of cases.
That's, of course, one track here. There's also the case in New Jersey with Mahmoud Khalil that is happening as well, and he's not going to be immediately removed.
Well, the interesting part about the Khalil case is that the government was asked to provide evidence that Khalil had done something that made him deportable. And essentially all they got back was a letter from Marco Rubio that says, because I said so. They didn't charge him with anything. There was no mention of criminality. And in the letter, Marco Rubio doesn't even speak about the foreign policy aspect of it. He just talks about what Khalil allegedly would do here in America as someone who's protesting what's going on.
Yeah, and meanwhile, the administration is deporting others who are not in the headlines, not getting a lot of attention. And it reminds me in a kind of a chilling way, in the 80s particularly, in countries like El Salvador, Central American countries, the disappeared. People who out of nowhere were taken from their houses, their families didn't know what happened to them, they were never accounted for. And it feels very, very troubling because in some ways we're kind of headed in that direction.
Yeah, hundreds of people in a prison in El Salvador now, and many of them, even the administration acknowledges, they have no criminal record here in the U.S. or in Venezuela, and some of them identified based on tattoos.
Yeah.
Something else I found troubling with the Khalil case was that he was taken to New Jersey. He was arrested and taken to New Jersey, and then transported to Louisiana, Gina, Louisiana, of all places, that became, I guess, notorious for the Gina 6 controversy and all that kind of thing. So it just struck me as, I guess, sadly ironic that that was a place that they thought that they could get a favorable outcome. I'm sending him to a place like that.
Ramesa Usturk is also there because that's the facility in which they take people who are fall under this category. Let's talk about the decision on reversal on these tariffs. Electronics, the smartphones, the semiconductors, some of these computers. Let's listen to, this is Senator Chris Murphy on what he says he sees as the commonality between some around the president and this exemption.
So Trump has announced that there are not going to be tariffs on high-tech electronics that are being imported from China. Well, the tariffs remain on textiles and coffee and fruit and vegetables. That makes no sense at all as economic policy. The companies that make the high-tech products that profit off the cheap labor in China, they're giving money to Donald Trump.
Tim Cook donated $1 million. He's CEO of Apple to Donald Trump's inauguration. Is it that simple? I mean, does this exemption reconcile with the overall tariff strategy of the administration?
Well, no, but one of the things, the reason that the president has now, as you've pointed out, has removed electronics from the tariffs for the time being, at least, is you've seen the reports. The iPhone suddenly, if the tariffs were in place, was going to cost twice what it costs today because of the tariffs. And as you point out, those tech giants like Tim Cook were at the president's inauguration. They contributed to his campaign. It's just another example of this really willy-nilly approach that we're seeing right now as Trump tries to formulate a policy that doesn't seem to have any basis in economic soundness.
And how it affects the consumers, right? These tariffs are basically tax on consumers, and it affects all of us. And when you go to the store, whether you go and go shopping, and this can have detrimental effect on people that are struggling to get by every day and living paycheck to paycheck and can't survive.
Which is interesting because the exemption of the cell phone, I mean, how often do you buy an iPhone? But if you have to go and buy clothes and food and all of the smaller things, the textiles, you're going to feel that every day. You may buy an iPhone every other year. They still will have that 145% they're going to feel more often.
Well, not to mention what all of this has done to the stock market.
Yeah.
I just retired. I've been in the workforce. I've been in the workforce since the early 70s, and decided finally about 8 weeks ago, time to retire. Sound financial plan, financial planners working with my wife and me for years. What the heck?
Listen, we had a financial therapist on a little earlier. I hope you met her in the makeup room. All right, everybody, stay with me, everybody. We got more to talk about coming up. Some redecorating at the White House. A portrait of President Obama replaced with one of President Trump shortly after the assassination attempt. We'll get into that. All right, Bill, Kelly, and Jason are still with me now. Let's talk about these big law firms. More over the last several days have reached this deal with the Trump administration to provide free legal services to avoid potentially being frozen out of representing federal contractors, maybe some executive orders that disadvantage them. The New York Times calculates the amount of pro bono work that's been donated in these agreements to $940 million now. Some are fighting, but Kelly, you're the attorney at the table. What do you think about what's happening here?
Well, there's two schools of thought in the law firms. Either settle with Trump and do this pro bono work, but also it's important to remember when you do this pro bono work, potentially there's conflicts, right? You're doing this pro bono work that you're saying is for the administration, but how if you have a client's interest is different than that? How do you deal with that internally in the firm? Do you get rid of that client? But other law firms are fighting it, saying this is not right. We as lawyers are supposed to uphold the Constitution. We're supposed to fight for what's right, and we believe this is unconstitutional for you to do this, and they'll take it to court and ultimately potentially go to the Supreme Court.
And some of these law firms are facing this because they either represented litigants or they took positions that the administration, specifically the president, didn't like.
Well, the other thing that I find disturbing, there's like a lasagna of like poisonous policy. There's like layers of how deeply this goes. Like the fact that a lot of these firms are being targeted because they practice DEI initiatives. They tried to uphold diversity. So Trump is trying to insulate himself from his own decisions with these law firms challenging him in court. He wants to challenge law firms who are practicing DEI. And he also wants to challenge these law firms that are doing pro bono work that might be for people who can't afford these services, like immigrants, like people of color, people who might need a law firm to represent them in some really hard times in their lives. So I think there's just multiple levels in which I find this to be disturbing.
Yeah, and the question is, if these big law firms, these powerhouse law firms are taking these deals, does it make it difficult for those who may want to sue the administration to get that type of representation? Let's talk about Stephen A. Smith. He says that he is not closing the door potentially on running for office, and he tweeted this out with a link to an article that mentioned he might run for president. He would run as what?
Well, that's my number one question is, A, what is Stephen A. Smith going to run as? He's been more vocal lately about his political feelings and things like that, and some people would, if you're a Republican, you look at him and say, oh, Stephen A. Smith is a Democrat and he's a raging liberal. And then if you're a liberal, you might say, well, Stephen A. Smith has these conservative things, these policies that he talks about sometimes he leans into. So where would he run? Where would he find a home is the first thing. The other part of it is that once the Trump administration is over, there's no telling what kind of space America will be in. And I just don't think that we need another non-politician to come in and play the president.
And if he wants to run as a Democrat, do Democrats have an appetite for a political novice? I mean, Republicans obviously cool for it.
I don't think Democrats know what they have an appetite for. You know, one of the reasons is I think Stephen Smith is once again talking about it. He dropped the idea a while back, but then he saw a poll of what Democratic voters are thinking about in terms of who they want for their candidate. And nobody did well. Kamala Harris had the highest numbers, but people like Pete Buttigieg were down at 2%. Smith was only down at around 2% as well. For him, that's an opening. And what it tells me, Victor, more than anything else is Democrats haven't got a clue who their next leader is going to be in the party. There's simply no one emerging right now who's going to take the leadership mantle. So Stephen A. Smith sees a vacuum.
Let's talk about, while we're on the White House, this switch in the Grand Foyer. a portrait of President Obama has been replaced. Now, it's been moved. It's not put in the closet anywhere. It's been replaced by this painting showing the moments right after the Butler, Pennsylvania attempted assassination. Typically, the sitting president doesn't hang a portrait of himself during his administration.
That's correct.
There-
Yes.
There's a level of hubris involved in this, but honestly, the first thing I thought about when I saw that this was the thing that he was doing, it reminded me of like a college student when you move in your dorm for the first time. What's the first poster you put up, right? Scarface, Tony Montana. You want to feel tough. You want to feel big. You want to have this. Some of us do. Some of us do. Maybe I'm switching on myself. Maybe I'm switching on myself. Maybe I'm switching on myself. But it made me think of like an 18-year-old who puts up Rambo or Scarface or someone in his dorm room to feel like, yeah, this is cool, this is edgy, this is tough. And it's like, you reminding us of when you were shot or had an assassination attempt on? I don't understand.
You know, of course, it's egotism at its best.
For sure.
That's what Trump is all about, narcissism. But let's face it, that photograph was an iconic moment and probably a motivating factor for any number of voters out there. So, do I think it should be there? No. But I understand why he, the narcissist he is, would want to see that photograph in the White House.
It's symbolic to him. Fight, fight, fight.
Yeah.
That was the chant after that.
Yeah.
It was very powerful to his voters.
Alaska, there's a bill in the state legislature that is recommending put the governor's mansion on Airbnb. When the governor's not using it during the legislative session or special session, let people rent it out. I don't know if that's the best security move, but what do you think?
I think it should only come with a stipulation that whoever is occupying it for any given time has to figure out how to balance the budget.
It comes with responsibility.
Absolutely.
I mean, listen, there's no accounting for taste, but I looked through some of the photos of the governor's mansion in the last. I don't know if that's a place where I personally want to stay.
Yeah.
It's not your cup of
It's
tea.
not really my style.
Yeah.
Well, the governor can't veto it, so he could say no.
Oh,
we're
that's
gonna
true.
stay in
Yeah,
my
you get the
house.
last vote there.
Exactly.
All right, finally, the dire wolves. After more than 12,000 years, there's a team out of Dallas that they have announced the birth of 3 dire wolf pups. They're cute, but it just makes me think of Jurassic Park. Like, just because we can, should we?
Have we learned nothing from John Hammond? Where's Laura Dern? Where is Sam Neill? Like, what in the Jon Snow is going on here? Why do we need dire wolves? Like, what? This thing is crazy to me. And the manipulation of DNA and all of these things. We have enough trouble fighting AI. The last thing we need now is to be fighting against species that we thought were extinct that might be coming back to kill us all. I'm not interested at all.
See, it's fascinating to me. I'm wondering, since they're pups, how big they're gonna get.
We will see.
Yes, we'll definitely
As big as
see.
this table.
We will see. All right, Kelly, Bill, Jason, thank you very much. All right, highlights from the Masters in Augusta. That's next.